back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to be watching a video on the oil and gas sector in the US. So I came across this on my YouTube feed. The video is called The Dark Secret Behind the Historic US Oil Boom. It is by DW Planet A and it's got about 150K views. I'm not too familiar with DW. I have a feeling it's a European uh, YouTube channel, but I have no idea. Let's see what they have to say. Um, as you may know that I have a lot of interest in the oil and gas. I actually worked for 10 to 12 years in the oil and gas sector as an engineer, and I was also an investor at one point. In fact, still am in some of the companies. And I believe in energy transition. It's inevitable, and we have to do what we can to weed ourselves out of oil and gas and over to renewable energy. So let's see what the video has to say.
This is the epicenter of oil, West Texas.
Oh, wow.
The United States is currently producing more oil than anywhere in history, and doing so despite its pledge to reduce emissions.
It's being pumped right here from deep underground and sent across the country and around the world.
Even though their statements may differ,
And we will drill, baby, drill. We're going to drill, baby, drill.
We should move more rapidly to renewable energy, the wind and solar.
all recent U.S. governments have pursued policies of drilling more oil. Proponents say it's good business, that it creates a lot of jobs and keeps living costs low for taxpayers, and that it's important for securing U.S. energy independence.
Yes.
I'm here to see what's going on at the center of it all.
And to find out whether those claims are true.
Yes, the claims are true. However, renewable energy can be a substitute for oil and gas. It too can create a lot of wealth and prosperity for the American people. It may not create a whole lot of energy or sorry, a whole lot of prosperity for landowners in Texas, but overall in the US, yes, it can create a lot of prosperity for others. And if I can jump in, uh, oil and gas is heavily dependent on natural resources and exploitation of natural resources. Meanwhile, renewables require technology and they require education. They require many different things. So what I want to say is benefiting from these two industries really depend on their background, where they are, and honestly what kind of skills and qualifications they have. So, anyways, and I should add that in Texas, there's a huge renewable boom since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed 2, 3 years ago. Texas is actually leading when it comes to renewables, growth in renewables in the U.S.
True. And what I found? A whole lot of pickup trucks, a situation more complicated than I'd ever imagined,
Oh, look! Yeah, I'm kind of scared of these things.
and a quiet problem that some claim could bankrupt the industry. It was unseasonably hot on the drive to West Texas, close to the New Mexico border. Random oil wells in use and abandoned dotted the landscape.
Ah, look, there's some right there.
In August of 2024, Texas produced around 5 million barrels of oil per day, about the production capacity of Canada.
Nearly half the oil produced by the entire country comes from this state.
So, oil ripples throughout the entire economy here.
Where we're headed, the University of Texas owns millions of acres of land, and the more oil is pumped, the more it adds to its endowment.
Museums around the state also live from oil money. That's including the Petroleum Museum in the city of Midland, heart of oil country. Everything here sits on top of the Permian Basin, an oil field that stretches from West Texas to New Mexico. There's a bunch of old oil equipment here because Texas has been at the center of U.S. oil booms for decades.
Yes, U.S. oil boom, and I should also add Texas technology has also been used overseas, especially in places like the Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and many other places. So when we talk about oil and gas, Texas has played a very big role, not just when it comes to production, but in terms of bringing in technology, expertise, and modern ways of pumping oil.
All of these behind me are old drilling rigs. They date back to the 1920s.
They're the first step in oil extraction, drilling a well. Then come the pumps.
Oh, there are some pumps we can go look at over there, actually. So when they first hit oil, it basically explodes out of the ground due to changes in pressure. But after a while, it doesn't really explode so much anymore, and you have to actually pump it. These are the pumps that do exactly that.
But it's not a simple process. To hear more about it, we spoke to Brian Grant, the executive director.
The oil is actually trapped within layers of rock that are in these different layers of strata. So we have to not only drill, but then we have to crack the rock.
People have been cracking the rock to get at that oil for more than a century, mostly with explosives.
And after that, they're going to inject the sand that will hold the fractures open.
This sand, along with water and chemicals, is a key component of modern fracking. Another is horizontally drilled wells, which are more productive than vertical ones. Since fracking took off, the U.S. has increased production by nearly threefold. It's been a part of every well junior field engineer Hollis Eubanks has worked.
We in Canada, Alberta, we also started using horizontal wells in late 2010s. Yeah, you can add a lot more production with the horizontal wells versus vertical wells.
Worked on. Hollis has worked in oil and gas for nearly a decade and directly in oil extraction for the last 5 years.
We will send in we call it a gun, and it's just an explosive tube barrel, and we'll perforate holes.
So you do the explosion.
Yes, ma'am.
We saw the explosion in the museum.
Hollis took us around to some work sites near the city.
Why did you start?
I forget, there's a name for this explosion. I'm not talking about fracking. Yeah, this is fracking, but what did we call it? I forget what we call it. But anyways, we in Calgary, sorry, not Calgary, in Alberta, we did not use, at least the oil fields I worked at, we did not use fracking. We used SAGD, which is a totally different type of exploiting natural resources.
Working in the oil and gas.
The big pull towards it was it's money. It's a lot of money. I know guys who don't even have a high school diploma that make 6 figures a year. It's hard to go back to a normal life just because it's one of those things that once it gets in your blood, it's kind of addictive.
It's a lot of money for the industry, too. This major oil and gas fund is at its second highest point since its creation. Chevron CEO Mike Wirth's salary rose 12% in 1 year to $26.5 million in 2023. Some of this money does stay in Texas.
This is all true. Just for a little bit of context, the oil and gas industry did struggle quite a bit from 2014 all the way to 2021, 2022. It's only that after COVID, when everything was devastated, oil and gas companies were devastated. It's only after everything was started up that they started making money, and then stocks started coming back. And there's reasons for that, of course.
In terms of wealth, the University of Texas is second only to Harvard. And the industry paid the state over $26 billion in taxes in 2023.
The money has went up, but as far as it feels like it's a little bit harder now since everything else is just higher.
So there's more to the story than the oil boom.
Yeah, and this is an oil boom. That's a good point. And but it's very cyclic. Like in a matter of 2-3 years, everything can go bust, and people will lose jobs. Towns will be vacated. Companies will go bankrupt. It can be devastating.
Creating many good jobs.
This right here is going to be An active job
That's
site,
an active job site, okay.
maintenance side of things. These guys work in rain, snow, heat, cold, everything. There's a lot of sacrifice with it. I think a lot of people are hesitant to do that.
Recently, there have been massive layoffs in the industry, some of which have been triggered by fracking-induced oversupply. On top of that, new technology means fewer workers in wells are necessary to keep up production. We reached out to companies around Midland to ask what this means for future job creation, but never heard back. Hollis says more people are leaving than he's ever seen.
But does that mean that Texas is less strict?
A lot of people just go back home and work at whatever they can find. A lot of guys I know have left and operate cranes now for wind turbines and solar.
It's true. It's true. And like I'm not an expert on what's happening in Texas, but generally speaking, at least in Alberta, and I think it happens in many other places too, oil is found in the most like rural areas, far away from cities. So people come out to make money, but then at some point they say, okay, you know what, that's enough. We're gonna go back and live more, I guess, complete life. Uh, I want to be honest, like when it comes to social life, culture, there's not much happening in oil patch counties and states even.
He's considering switching as well because those jobs offer more time at home. Nationwide, renewable energy jobs are growing twice as fast as the rest of the energy sector and the U.S. economy. Another more complicated claim is that more drilling will mean U.S. energy independence. For raw crude oil to be used, it's often turned into petroleum products like gasoline. This is done in refineries around the country, many of which are in Texas. But most U.S. refineries were built before the fracking boom, which turns out a different type of oil. The last full-capacity refinery in the U.S. was built in 1977. This means a lot of fracked crude oil is...
So I am a chemical engineer by education. I did my undergrad in chemical engineering, and it's funny because that was in 2009, 2010, and my professor, like that's when we learned that like there hasn't been a new refinery in North America since like 1977, and we were shocked because it is chemical engineers who build and operate these refineries. So we're like, oh, okay, like our job prospects don't look that good. We knew that honestly, even when we started doing our internships and co-ops.
Was exported mostly to Europe and China. The US then imports different oil, mostly from Canada. So the oil boom has decreased imports slightly, but the system isn't set up for the US to wean itself off imports entirely. And more drilling doesn't directly equal lower prices, as proponents claim. Even though it does play a role, it's just one piece of a complicated global puzzle. Moreover, companies want the price of oil to be high. That way they can offer competitive salaries, invest in new infrastructure, and theoretically plug old wells.
That's true, and that's especially true in Texas because the Permian Basin or the reservoirs in general are not as long living as reservoirs in other places. So in Texas, they have to continue to drill wells, and they have to drill wells at a much faster pace to keep up their production. So for example, in Canadian oil sands, a well would last like more than 10 years, maybe 15 years. Same in Saudi and Kuwait. But in Texas, it's like less than 2 years.
That's just as important as drilling because you have to, when you're done with something, you got to make sure that it's not going to come back and haunt you in the future, which has happened to a lot of places around here.
Those unplugged wells are quiet.
Yeah, these unplugged wells or stranded wells, or they're also known as orphan wells. That's what happens when the company that owns a well basically goes bankrupt, or basically a stranded well that does not have an owner. Yeah, becomes an orphan well. Yeah, there's many in Alberta.
Quietly causing massive damage and could seriously threaten oil companies' bottom lines. They can leach chemicals into the groundwater and methane into the air. Methane emissions from only around 1,000 US wells have been studied, But some individual wells have been found to emit as much methane as 4,000 cars in 1 year. And companies are leaving taxpayers to deal with the problem.
We're headed outside Midland.
Honestly, like from what I've found is that taxpayers don't care. Like in a lot of these oil and gas places, they don't care. They are very much pro oil and gas, and yeah, I don't think they mind paying taxes for to cover up these wells. And honestly, they shouldn't be paying. Taxpayers should not be paying for this. Oil and gas, technically, they always leave funds for I think what they call is salvage cost, or I'm forgetting all the lingos, all the terms, but yeah, I remember like when we would run economics, when we were making business cases to drill wells in an area, we would allocate some funds for decommissioning and completing the wells again.
To some ranches that have abandoned wells on their properties, and they're causing big problems for the people who live there. Hi, Piggy. Hi. Hi. Amanda, nice to meet you.
I'm sorry.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Like many in the state, Laura Briggs has deep ties to the oil industry.
My grandpa worked for Enco, Humboldt, Esso, Exxon. My dad worked for Exxon.
But partially due to the fracking boom, she's living with ticking time bombs.
This well here was one of the old orphaned wells that blew August 1st.
Blew, like
It
blew up?
blew produced water everywhere. And produced water is the wastewater that's left over after they drill an oil and gas well. So we don't even know what's in it. It's their trade secret. What they frack with is what they're injecting underground that's causing these old wells to make trouble.
The produced water got on Laura's animals, and when she touched them, it felt like drain cleaner on her skin. Other than causing these old wells to blow, those wastewater injections can also cause earthquakes. Another well on her property hasn't blown yet.
Sometimes the pressure is really bad and sometimes it's really low. My neighbors across the river have some plugged wells, and they say they weep. Like sometimes they're wet around it and sometimes they're not. No, Mr. Guys.
Many wells are in rural areas, which makes them easier to ignore. Laura has to wait for this well to blow before the Railroad Commission, which oversees oil and gas in Texas, will plug it. Hawk Dunlap is one.
Yeah, like it's so interesting that they mentioned the Railroad Commission. Even in Canada, all the mineral rights, all the land, a lot of the land where oil and gas is or was owned by railway companies, railway crown or whatever. So I guess like back like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, all these railroad companies, they owned a lot of land.
One person drawing attention to this issue. He fixes problematic wells for a living and noticed how big the problem with abandoned wells really was.
So this is a Chevron well that was plugged in 2010 by Chevron.
I just want to say, like, okay, the gentleman, he's eating, I forget what he's chewing. He's chewing tobacco, I think. And this is so interesting because you go to Alberta and oilmen there have, a lot of them have same kind of approach. And you can find them eating or chewing tobacco. So you can see the similarities between these two places, despite the fact that they're so far away from each other. So that's quite something. I feel like there's a lot of there's a strong connection between Texas and Alberta because of the oil and gas industry, because of the agriculture industry, and for many other reasons, of course. But it's just very, very interesting.
We've excavated it right at about a month ago. So what you see here is the remnants of the well that's supposed to be plugged. As you can see, there's crude oil leaking outside of it.
Damn, like,
This is
okay, I've never seen anything like this in Alberta or anywhere else, but I've heard of, third world countries. I can't believe this is the US. But anyways, I know that US has very lax regulations, but this is crazy.
crude oil, live crude. It's got gas in it. We tested the oil. It's also got produced water in it. And 2 years ago, we started digging up wells. and the first 7 we dug up were leaking. They were like this.
All of them?
The first 7 that we did.
Wow.
Since then, we've dug up on this ranch 100, and I would say
Wow.
95 of them are leaking. And the other 5, I'm not for certain that they're not.
There are 8,375 unplugged wells on the official Texas list, and an estimated 783,000 inactive wells in the state.
So, by the way, during COVID, when a lot of oil and gas companies were not drilling, were not completing wells, Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Canada basically came up with a program where they basically, if I can just put in simple terms, they hired a lot of these contractors and asked them to abandon all these wells properly, a lot of these wells. So, and this program was the goal was to, yes, to be create a safe place for a lot of these folks, but also to get people to get to give people to work, to get people to get people working again.
That doesn't include improperly plugged wells like this one. Properly closing them is going to be expensive.
So you're looking at Chevron having to pay $500,000 to $1 million for every well like
Wow,
For every well?
this. Sure.
that's a lot of money. My estimates, and this is like from 10 years ago, we would allocate like maybe 100,000 Canadian dollars, 150 maybe. Wow, okay, this is crazy. This is incredible.
There are state and federal cleanup programs, but they don't have nearly enough money.
Like the oil and gas industry pays $26 billion a year to the government of Texas. So if the government of Texas wants, they can use that money to clean this mess up. But again, like this mess is truly the private company's creation, and it's their responsibility. So I don't think Texas government should be cleaning this up. But having said this, they should not let these private companies get away with stuff like this. And by the way, I've heard of stories, and this happens quite a bit. Big giants, when a well starts to decline, big giant oil and gas companies, they sell off their wells to junior mom and pop oil and gas companies. And once those small companies have taken over, they kind of like deplete the reservoir, and that's it. They don't have the funds to abandon wells. So that's a technique that a lot of big oil and gas companies take.
I'm going to suspect that the majority of the wells that had already been plugged are going to have to be revisited at some point.
I mean, that's like trillions of dollars.
Yeah. You can bankrupt an oil company.
Yes.
Whoa.
Sarah Stogner is also publicizing the issue. She and Hawk are planning to take Chevron to court over these abandoned wells.
I tell people it's kind of like a 12-step program. There's like the first step is admitting that there's a problem. If you were to ask anyone behind closed doors off the record, everyone would admit that this is a problem. But what will they say on the record? We've plugged more wells under the Orphan Wells program, and we've beat our legislative goals, and we're great, rah, rah, go team. But we've dug up, 4 of those, and they're all leaking.
Between badly plugged wells like these and the damage done, Sarah thinks the companies have too many liabilities for future revenue to cover. Still, she and Hawk aren't against the industry.
Cut my wrist, I'm going to bleed crude oil. I've got a daughter that wants to come up the same way. We're not anti-oil, we're just anti-half-ass.
You feel the same way?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I was like, you took the words out of my mouth.
There's obviously like a lot of wells that are already in operation and they're producing oil.
Yeah.
And like, is there anything that people can do with those wells to not have this situation in the future?
Yeah, you properly abandon them when you stop using them. And when they start to exhibit signs of mechanical integrity failure.
By the way, like what would happen is in Alberta at least, when a well starts declining, in some cases they would not abandon them. In a lot of cases, they don't abandon them because they say, oh well, And I think it's just a talking point. Now that I think about it, it's a talking point. They say, oh, well, in 10 years, there may be new technology and we may be able to recover even more oil from these wells with with high decline rates. So let me reword that. So basically, let's take a step back. What happens is in a reservoir, there is X amount of oil in place, and your goal is to recover as much as you can. But in Alberta, the recovery rates are depending on the technology you're using. If you're using coal production, SAGD, fracking, whatever, you get different recovery rates. But generally speaking, a well sometimes has a recovery rate of like less than 10%. In some cases, it's as much as 65, 70%. It's never 100%. Very rare cases. So, in fact, I've seen, by the way, some wells that had recovery of more than 100%. But that's a whole different story. So what they're trying to say is, oh, look, our recovery factor is only 65%. We still have a lot of oil down hole. Let's wait a decade or two, and once we have some new technology, we can go back and try to extract that oil too. But honestly, that I've seen that happen on a very few cases.
You quickly address them, and if you can't fix them, you abandon the well and you bury it and you pay for the funeral.
Do you think that's happening?
No.
Sarah and Hawk even found a spot on the property with oil in the groundwater.
We are subsidizing the cleanup. The money that the industry pays in taxes then gets turned around and used to clean up their mess. And Hawk's expression is like wiping your butt with a hula hoop.
You just keep coming around.
A major stated reason behind more drilling is that it keeps costs low for taxpayers. But the hidden costs of plugging old wells and cleaning up toxic chemicals are not being calculated.
Honestly, it's a very good thing that folks like the gentleman and the lawyer are they're doing good work, and yeah.
In. And with continued reliance on oil imports, the industry claim of energy independence doesn't match with reality. A study by the oil-rich University of Texas found that the state could get to net zero emissions by 2050, and the economy would actually grow. That's partially because of the strong growth in jobs and renewables.
Okay, yes.
Texas is known for its energy, and oil and gas are deeply connected to people in the state. But despite the promises made, the industry isn't living up to its claims.
And by the way, that's true everywhere. Even in Canada, the industry is running away from a lot of their responsibilities. And I think at one point we would look up to Norway, but even Norway has abandoned a lot of their, you know, good and they're just like being a good owner of oil and gas, a good operator. Um, yeah, so there's just too many things at play. People prefer to look at things in the short term. Long term, no one really cares about.
If you liked this video, let us know. If you didn't, let us know why. Either way, don't forget to subscribe. We have new videos every Friday.
Okay, and at the start of the video, I had said that this is a European channel, but my apologies. I don't know if it is a European channel or not. I might have been wrong. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. Goodbye.